We can assign multiple selectors to a component. So in the to-do table, so the task table component.ts right here, we can add one more selector. For example, we can call it to-do table. So not only task table, but only to-do table. Now we can load the component either by using task table or to-do table tag. So let's go in our task list component.html, and instead of using task table, let's just switch over to to-do table, right? For sure we need to adjust the closing tag too, so to-do table, but you can see that works. So this is how we have a multi or a so-called multi-selector, right? We have multiple selectors right here. So far, all of our examples for selectors have been based on tag selectors so far, so those right here. But selectors are much more flexible. We can select components which we want to load by its HTML class. So for example, let's add another selector, but this time that one starts with a dot. We want to put that into the quotes. So it starts with a dot so that we indicate it's an HTML class or a CSS class, right? So task table class. So as I said, make sure you got that dot here because that indicates a class, CSS class. Now let's switch to the HTML. Let's make that a div, right? So that it has now selector defined in here, just like this. And let's add a class here. So typical HTML class, let's set it to task table class. Inside here we don't have to use the dot for sure, right? This is just for out of HTML. So task table class, right? If we just have that here as a class, you can see compilation works fine. And if we take a look at the application, it will work just like that. Awesome. However, we can even go ahead one step further and for example also use an attribute selector. So go to the component.ts, add one more selector, and this time we want to use brackets. So task table attribute, just like this. Go to the HTML again, and what we want to do is we can remove the class around here. So if you got this like in your HTML, then it's an attribute. Now for sure we have to adjust it, so task table attribute, this is how we define it in the task table here, right? So task table attribute, just like this. This is an HTML attribute. You can see it's compiling again and it will also work. Well, and finally, we can also select only elements that do not match a certain selector. So for example, we can say only select task table component by the is task table true value selector, for example. We will add that just in a second. Only if the tag doesn't have omit me for true, for example, right? So what we can do is we switch to the TypeScript right here. Let's add a colon at the task table attribute. So set it to not when not we have an attribute which says omit dash me set to true. So in that way, when we save it, go back to the HTML and add another attribute here, which is omit dash me set to true. There we go. You can see that we get the compilation error, which is fine, right? And if we set it to false, you can see that it is working. So in that case, we have a like not condition, right? Because here we are searching only a task table attribute if omit me is not set to true. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, that was the not selector, and we can get rid of all what we have created here from all the selectors. So let me just remove them with just for demonstration. So I can also remove those and get back to task table. So yeah, those are selectors which you can use depending on your use case, for example. Depending on your use case, just like this. Awesome. That looks fine. Now it's back to default. And yeah, you can even use the not selector, right? Great. So just keep in mind, you can use the default selector, you can use HTML class selector, you can use HTML attribute selector, and you can combine all of this using the not selector.